Everyone, we wanted to take a quick moment to thank all the listeners, the viewers, and of course the patrons out there. The team here at Vectorsigma hopes that we can bring a little levity and a distraction from the weight of the real world. Time is always precious, but that has become even more obvious now. We want to say that we really do appreciate everyone out there that's spending their time with us. Welcome back, folks, to Tech Talk, the officially unofficial Transformers TCG podcast. I'm joined, as always, by Scott of Vectorsigma.info, and we had a brief hiatus there, Scott. I got some messages that people were concerned.
Yeah, I think the big thing to understand is like this format we've been going over for a long time, so it can be hard for us to find. We basically don't want to just be restating ourselves over and over again. So
absolutely. I mean, it's also it was endearing that we've become such a standard, such a I want to say monument to in people's lives or something. I wanted to make it sound super grand.
Yeah. I don't want to be one of those monuments torn down. So
definitely not. So, but we've become such a fixture in people's lives that people did notice when we did miss a week. It was intentional, and I apologize to everybody out there that's watching or hearing this that I had tweeted it out, but I should have put it in more places so people are aware that we were just taking a quick week. But we're back, and we have a number of things to discuss. The first one up, Scott, is actually we're pretty deep at this stage, and by the time this goes officially live, we should be into the last round of the Vectorsigma Titan Masters Attack release event, our sealed event.
Yep.
So it's been fun, and I have to admit, so I had some question marks, and not in the fashion of like, I don't know about this. It was just, okay, I have this hypothesis. I want to test it. And I've definitely generated some concrete data from my sealed build. Do you feel the same way, or are things like going exactly how you planned, or what are your initial thoughts on that now that we have a few rounds under our belt?
I mean, I sideboard out 2 cards every single time, so I think that clearly I was off by a little bit. I mean, I'm 3-1 right now. I think that I didn't think my deck was particularly strong. But I think having 2 Titan Masters, no matter like what the quality of those Titan Masters are, like mine are like Monkso and Briscoe.
But which bodies did you have?
Cup and Quake.
Okay.
So Quake is really good. I can put that out there.
Thunk it.
Yeah. I think. So I don't know where, like, to me, it's about different things. So I think in terms of building my sealed, I think the biggest problem that I had was that I just don't have a very good action to upgrade ratio.
I fell into the same boat.
I just have way too many upgrades and way too many, I think I have 4 green upgrades.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like I never, there's never a turn where I don't have an upgrade to play.
Right.
And 3 of those are weapons. I think 1's an armor. So it's like, I mean, you can cheat that in Constructed because you can just be like, I always have whatever, and then so I'm good. Obviously, greens are just underpowered compared to non-greens, but like in sealed, that's not the case. So like, just having one and having to make a decision every turn about what upgrade I'm going to play, whereas like things like random armors that I had in there for the pip colors, like they just don't really serve much of a purpose and should have just been random actions that I at least would have been playing more often. So.
I kind of came to the same conclusion because of the same issue. It was very much, man, these actions are just not good. There's one that I'm boarding in every time. But to be honest, I think one of the other errors I had was the pip distribution, and it might have been fine to just play a weaker Battletext card action because I could play it instead of looking at 5 upgrades in my hand every turn or something like that.
Right.
And it also would have been more on color, because what I found, because I also had 2 Titan Masters, Cup and Horrible. The problem is that I've only completed 3 rounds. My other one at the time this be after this recording goes live, but it's still upcoming at the time of this recording. Every round I've had multiple. I think I went to 3 games every single time. I might be wrong. I'm pretty sure it was 3 every time. And across each round, I had multiple attacks entirely blunted by just like I hit no black pips on the attack, and they flip a blue, and it's like, all right, well, I guess Cup or the head or the whatever just does nothing, and they basically time walked me because my entire turn didn't matter. So it was.
I can't say I've had that issue, but I know what you're saying.
It's just the way it worked out. I didn't have a ton of black pips in my pool, and it definitely mattered. So one of the other caveats is, so Crankcase is my 3rd bot. Let me tell you a story about Mindwipe. And then I'll tell you a story about the 2 Chrome Domes that I saw.
Yeah, very fair.
It did not end well, is the moral of the story. The times that my opponents allowed me to power up Crankcase, or I was able to because I drew Scouting Mission off of a played mission briefing or something. And I was able to, I just have quantity of cards. I can still hit with Crankcase. Everything was gravy. It just didn't happen every round, or not every game in every round. A lot of lessons learned, I have to say. My card evaluations on some things have changed. I don't think it's like wild whiplash on anything. Did you come to that conclusion, or do you think everything coming in was roughly where you had it? Aside from obviously the ones you're boarding in and out.
But I'm not boarding them in from a power level perspective. I'm literally only boarding them in from a like playability perspective. Like
gotcha.
where I kind of messed up was, like mission briefing should have been definitely main deck. I wasn't playing it main deck because I just didn't take into consideration that, like, because I have one guy that's always going to be in bot or body mode, and then no one else is, because I have like Sky Shadow Plane as my 3rd character, so like he's obviously never going to be in bot or body mode. So it was like, but the heads are always in bot mode.
Yes.
So like in the mid to late game, I can always just draw 2. Like it's never a question that I'm not going to draw 2.
Pep talk on demand in limited is pretty good.
Yeah. So and just I just have so many more upgrades that I could have just cut like at least 1 upgrade main deck and then just played it. But
yeah.
So that was like one card that I would say was my, and then the other one I always board in is like Counter Espionage, which like there aren't a lot of secret actions, but there's so many times that my opponent was like getting greens on attacking that I know what's in their hand. So it's like I could just use it and then again have a play for the turn instead of sitting there staring at 3 upgrades every single turn and having to decide which one to play. So
exactly, Counter Espionage made it main for me simply because it's a zap because of Horrible,
right?
But also I did manage to nab a secret action, but they did exactly what you said. They greened it back on offense, right. So I knew it was there when they played it, so I was able to just actually get it off the board. It did. I think I got something else that somebody greened back once, some random action, like a disassemble or something, which was fine. But overall, I appreciate the limited format more, and we may touch on this in the next topic with the content update. But as I played it, like I said, the best way to put it is I've appreciated more what went into building this limited format from the design perspective, as well as the intricacies, almost couldn't say that one for some reason, in the actual play style. There were definitely points where I made a play or made an attack or even chose against an opponent, whether I was going first or second, and said, oh, I should have done this, as opposed to, and I'm only harping on this because it's very often for people to just go, well, it's sealed, who cares? It's just whoever opens the best cards. No, there's still a lot to it from a play pattern perspective, from a deck building perspective. There's still a lot of different focal points.
I think there's less in this than there was in Siege.
You think so, really? Even despite the fact that there were so many Siege cards that just didn't have playable text, for the most part?
every single deck you played against in Siege was not 3 wide. Here it's like every single deck is 3 wide. So
That's
basically
fair.
the pattern is you either can't get to their best guy on the first go round, or they can't get to your best guy on the first go round.
Mhm.
And it's like basically like whatever's left after the first full combat round, whatever carnage is left is basically like, I mean, there's a lot more interplay than there is in Constructed, where like you can basically like block and like you can force your opponent into certain attacks and things like that. But ultimately, there's no way to get around the issue of like you can either not get it guys or you can only get it guys.
Fair.
So like, I
think my view of it is skewed because of Horrible. Obviously, like I can
probably
influence certain all the scenarios you're describing. Yeah, it did mostly work out as you'd expect, but I did have influence on. Well, I mean, my opponent had to at least respect, oh, well, they could ping this guy away, or they could burn that guy down, because I could have Kamian Crash sitting in my hand. I'll just do the Constructed thing.
Yeah, I mean, like, have you noticed, has there been anything you've learned by playing Limited that you think you can apply to Constructed?
So I've grown a greater respect for Mind Wipe, and that's not just because of the Crankcase thing. I've grown a greater, and I liked Crankcase before, a greater appreciation for Crankcase himself, because it was very much a hypothetical. It's like, yeah, well, if I hit for 8, fine, but then what about all these other 10,000 things? And now that I've seen it enough times where it's like, no, 8 is more than... Like, it sounds weird to say that 8 is more than I thought it was, because, like, well, it's 8.
Oh, yeah.
It's a number. We know what it is. But both of those cards impressed me a lot. I also got beat up by not Weird Wolf. That's his old name. Wolfwire?
Yeah.
I almost said Wirewolf, and I don't know what's going on today. Anyway, he was cool to see, but I think he's going to be a limited all-star. To be perfectly honest. Other character cards that impressed me, Chrome Dome beat the crap out of me, partially because of Crankcase, but it was pretty disruptive. Constructed-wise, it's still... If you're going to play Cars or try and leverage his disruption element, that's cool. I just don't know if Cars is there, kind of thing. Like, it just doesn't do its thing enough. If you assume that it's super orange heavy, him being a Titan Master and still being relatively sizable, depending on what head you put on him, etc., maybe that's enough to do the old-fashioned thing where you get him with the car and untap it to try and gain an extra attack, and that guy's probably not going to die out of combat. Because, like, yeah, he'll take 8, but he has 15 health, or whatever.
I think he has a lot. I think he has 14 to start with, or something like that. Or
yeah, he has 13
to start with.
Yeah, he has 13 or 14 to start with, and then, say it's Kreb head, say it's a whatever head, and you're still not stars-wise pushing it that much. So I've gained a greater appreciation for those characters. I don't know that any of them are necessarily going to make it, but I definitely wanted to circle back to some of them once we were done with this event, or as we're nearing the end of this event. Battle card-wise, it's a lot of them they are who I thought they were.
See, for me, it's that they are good in their context. Like, I have 2 Sharpened Talons. They're insane. I would never play it over...
Exactly.
Scoundrel's Blaster. So, like, what's the point of caring how good it is? You know what I mean? Like that. But that to me is basically like every set has to have a card like this type of thing.
Of course, yeah. And a lot of these are limited fodder. Like that's what the purpose they are in the set for. It's not anything exciting. It's just if you draft or you play sealed, this is why they have their home, which is fine. I don't think the one card that I'm boarding in every time I ultimately did not play at main was Last Stand, and I've been mulling around whether there was any way to make that happen in Constructed, but even with weird Quake shenanigans, I'm not sure.
See, I think that has a place, and I've played it. I played it main, and it's won me 2 games.
Yeah. It won me 1 game. I boarded in. It won me the subsequent game as a result.
Yeah. I think it's a big addition, and if the guy's just going to get KO'd anyway, then what does it matter?
Right.
Like so.
Well, the scenario that I was trying to envision for that is whether, and for me, it was literally a Last Stand, if I recall correctly. It was oh, well, I only have one guy, you have one guy, last stand, get in
Right,
and get
right.
there. And it was headmaster on headmaster, so it was clearly as close to a guarantee as you can get. When you shift it to constructed, though, the concern I have is that it has a very narrow window because you're going to have to get in with someone else prior. So the reason, unless it's that literal last stand scenario, because you're going to need that blocker. Otherwise, like, okay, your whole team is now exposed. Or even if it's a Titan Master, you pop the head off on tap. So it gets a little more complicated, whereas in Limited, I think you have a wider window because even if your team is exposed, somebody may not die because they're not just going to load up and murder your whole team or something.
Yeah, I just wonder if that matters per se. It might not. Like, I mean, it's basically you're just giving them like a wheel or something like that, but that might be okay. And and the fact that it's end of turn means like your head won't pop off and get to attack with it also.
Right. Which may or may not be a benefit depending on what you want to do.
There were just a lot of scenarios where I was basically getting more attackers than my opponent because I was because Cup is just so fragile that like he was never making it through the first combat round, so I always wound up with more wheel attacks.
I know I think I ran more blues than you, but the Cup never died. I mean, obviously he died, but like he tanked 4 or 5 hits every game, but I also had the +1 defense head on him because I put Kreb on.
Okay.
Horrible.
Okay.
And since the tough one, he was able to dig for the additional blues that I had, but that also plays into I probably should have cut some of those blues just to have an orange, even if the card was never going to get played. And it also was one other thing I noticed that was a little weird. I had counted on, I have the double pips. I'll get back Sharpened Talons and Mission Briefing and Triangulators and whatever other. I had a bunch of greens. Because they were all upgrades and I was locked into playing those one upgrade a turn, it was like eventually I ran out of greens to get the other garbage out of my hand.
Yes, I know exactly what you're saying.
Yeah, it was a little awkward staring at double Sharpened Talons, Energon Mace, and then draw like arbitrary other weapon. Like
or draw one of your doubles, which always happened to me also.
Yep.
So yeah.
Yeah, I had a lot of handheld blasters in my hand, and I tried feeding them into Cup, but it was just because of the multiple flips with Horrible, it just got all out of whack, so it wasn't quite happening. But what are you going to do? I can definitely look back and say that I should have done certain things differently, and it would have gotten me another win or two. We'll see.
Cool.
But I think we can close that one up and move on to a general channel update, I guess, or a general Vectorsigma update. So let me kick it to you, Scott, because there's a bunch of different things going on before we get into our formal topic.
Yeah, so we've kind of looked at where the game is in terms of like how often we have topics to talk about and how often we no one. I want to start out by saying that no one is more dedicated to spending time and effort on this game than we are, and the people that aren't on the podcast, like Dan and Stefan and things like that. So, like, I mean, you see us all the time involved. So it's not really about that. It's just that we have other hobbies, and we just figure you as an audience might, like, in these times where there's still a lot of quarantining. There's probably should be more quarantine than there is.
I think we
things
can
like that.
Safely say that. Yeah.
As you see, like, for example, we went from having a potential event in August 1 week to suddenly it was canceled like a week later. Like, so it's obvious that this yo-yo pattern of what we're able to do is going to continue. Like, for example, I'm not going back to work until, like, physically probably until 2021. Who knows when in 2021 at this point.
Right.
We happen to live in a state that's relatively under control comparatively than the recent issues. But so that being said, like, we have other hobbies. So what we decided to do for on YouTube, for example, is just kind of branch out and show the current audience other things we do. We're also looking to basically expand into, like, more into the Transformers itself realm. So, like, we have certain things on the docket that we're looking forward to doing. Show reviews, like I'll just give you examples. Like, Dan's never seen the 1986 movie, so we said, why don't we have Dan watch the 1986 movie, and then Vince and I will just, like, to ask him what he thought about it and things like that. Like we're not gonna do
it'll be a fun movie breakdown with him.
Yeah, because we don't even have to watch it again to know all the scenes, I'm sure. So like it's fun to get people involved in that kind of stuff. And then like there's a new Netflix show coming out, so we can branch out and look at that. I think there's a lot of lore aspects of the Transformers that like we know, but we're certainly not the experts that are out there in the world. So like trying to get a hold of some of them and talk to some of them and not necessarily be TCG focused on Transformers, but still have that realm. And then that's one aspect of it. And the other aspect, like I said, is we have other hobbies. So we we figure a lot of us share interests, like people we've talked to offline or people we talk to online. So like when somebody says like, what are you playing right now? Like you tend to like, that this person, you have this in common with this person. So maybe like I'll pick that up because this person said they liked it. Like we're not saying we're like influencers or anything like that, but like we figure, we're doing other things. We might as well share what else we're doing.
Exactly.
To show you guys what's going on.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of room in that realm. And for anybody out there that maybe, just to head off the inevitable question, as Scott plainly stated, but just to call it out, we're not getting away from any of the competitive Transformers TCG stuff. This is more supplemental as far as getting other avenues covered. When we talked about it the other night, it was started out obviously with, well, why don't we talk about Transformers more? Scott and I tend to on here a lot, just, especially during preview season. It's like, oh, remember this character, remember this moment, that sort of thing. I think it will be cool with the new show coming out. We're training Dan to be a Transformers fan, if that makes sense. Like he's getting into it now, so it'll be cool to explore the show in that fashion with somebody who hasn't really been in the fandom at all, and then us still being in it for a while. I'm looking forward to a lot of this stuff because there are a number of overlapping interests, like Scott was describing, as far as other games we play, other media we consume, that sort of thing. Both with the topics we discuss here, as well as just, all the patrons and other people that we interact with where, we all play card games. It's not a surprise that, oh, this sort of video game is appealing, or, oh, this sort of movie is appealing. You know what I mean? There's a lot of overlap there, and hopefully we can, reveal some of these worlds to people and people will enjoy it. But definitely hit us up with feedback for things that, hey, I liked how you guys did this, or it would be cool if you talked about that sort of thing. Because I'm very curious what everybody else out there clings to outside of the Transformers TCG.
Yeah, like, and I'll just give you an example for my own. Is like I never had time or knew that like the Headmaster series, the Japanese one, you can find on YouTube. I prefer watching dubbed. I'm sure it's probably better subtitled. I don't know, because the dubbing is not the best, but like I only knew it existed tangentially, and then basically like because I was never. I don't remember when the 3-part series came out, but I know I was like. I want to say I was like in 6th grade or something like that. So I was a little bit older. So like, and obviously the show just ended then.
Right.
All they would do is do the replays. But I know I've come to learn that in Japan the series just kept continuing.
Yep.
And like didn't even take the what happened in that 3-parter as gospel. So like none of that happened in the Japanese series.
Right.
And it continued on to G1, and then like threads of that, even I think in a Japanese medium, like continued to this day in some.
I was about to say, to my knowledge,
no.
Everything in that set of lore is considered G1, no matter where it came from or what series it was. Like, it's all part of G1, technically and chronologically. And I haven't gotten that. Like, I know a lot of Transformer stuff, but to your earlier point, I'm by no means the complete expert. So my knowledge on that end, that's one of the avenues we're considering pursuing, because I would love to know more.
So, like, I've never watched that stuff, so I found it, and, like, I also had never seen Scramble City, and I watched that, and so, like, the one episode. So, like, there's definitely things out there that are within my own wheelhouse of parts of Transformers that I already enjoy that I've never watched. Right. And so, like, we could go back and talk about a lot of that kind of stuff and, like, what we saw. Like I watched the first episode the other day, and, like, my 50-foot opinion is some of the art is really awesome, like movie quality, and some of the cuts are bad. So I don't understand. I don't get like what went into making an episode, but the story kind of just like, bam, you're there. Like there's no setup at all. So like
nice.
It's just like, okay, so
yeah, there's a lot of different ways we can take this. So it's we're exploring other things that we can add on to what we're already doing, which should hopefully sound fun to everybody out there listening and watching. Like I said, let us know if there are particular things you think we should try and target, or give us feedback on the ones as you consume them and let us know, okay, this was cool, this wasn't, whatever.
Yeah, but as our state opens up, like we do plan to get together and play test more often, like physically. So some of our videos won't be as. I mean, we'll still have webcam focused videos, but like we all live closer to each other, where that we can try to film like live. It's just better quality and things like that. But like we will still have obviously all the webcam games and things like that, because that's where we're running all the events.
Exactly. It's all going to be based on. Well, we'll see what the medical experts recommend as time goes on.
Yeah, but I mean, just playing an hour and 10 minutes every few days as a round is just gives us more time to explore other things, because a lot of us just waiting for 25 other people to finish what they're doing. So
right, exactly. Yeah. So we wanted to make sure that we put that out there to everybody, so that you could, when you see one of these videos pop up and you go, well, what is that? That has nothing to do with the cards that we're playing with. There's your answer. Preemptive answer, preface, whatever. We'll go from there. So, from that end, aside from the content updates and the updates on the release event, we did have an internal question, I guess, from in our Discord about testing, Scott. Now, this is a stranger topic, given kind of what we were outlining earlier, because there are limitations and have been for several months now. So, and we have also touched on this in the past as part of lead-ups to certain events. But I want to hand it to you to tell us a little bit, or set us up for this discussion about how to properly test.
Yeah, so I think one of the big things that's come up, and again, I think this is the nature of the way that games are played online as opposed to the way that they're played in person. Like, we could have had, we could have we used to have big monthly constructed events. Like, we could have 2 of them in the time it might take us to finish an event now. And so the play pattern of playing and like internalizing results and then going out and testing against what you saw, tweaking decks and things like that, is a slower period, because instead of using the same deck for like all day on a Saturday, you're literally using the same deck for like all month.
But still maybe only getting in the same quantity of games.
Right. Like quantity of tournament games. Like, obviously you can test, and that's where this is going. Like, you can test other things, but like sometimes, and I guess that's the first point, is that's just important. That's just important to do. Like know that, like, I guess this. If you're gonna Monday morning quarterback yourself when you show up to a tournament and say, I could have done this better and I'll change it for the next one, like, that's perfectly fine. But just know that a lot of that is going to happen, like, probably in the middle of an event, and there's really no way of you changing it on the fly in one of these events, because they're just a longer period of time, and there won't be another event kicking off for you to go enter with your 5-card different version of that deck tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, the turnover and the evolution cycle for these sort of changes is certainly elongated by virtue of just what we're trying to do and how, and the process itself, which is going to, I could certainly see that being a frustrating element for a number of people, because exactly what you said, it's like you register your, say normal times a year ago, you go to an event, you register your deck, and you're sitting there waiting for round 1. It's like, if you look around the room or you just can hear people talking about that, it's like, man, maybe I should have boarded this or that, and then it proves true or not throughout the course of the event. Exactly what you said. All right, I'll get them next week. All right, now it's like, I'll get them in August. Okay?
Right.
You know?
Right. And I don't know. I can't talk from. I have no personal experience, so like, I'm not positive whether this is or is not occurring. But like, I know for the events that are not run by us in any way, shape, or form, I don't know what kind of communication there is among the player base that's going on. I only see when those events are going on by players that are in our own Discord, and like they're talking about the events that are going on, and obviously our own events that are going on. I see people talking about, but like I don't know how much. Like I can't walk over to the table next to me and watch their game.
Right.
So like I think one of the benefits for us is that like a lot of the games we're playing are recorded,
Yes.
and are streamed, and so like we're trying, there is a little bit more of a sense of an event going on, and I don't think that's hard to duplicate, especially when like you're using like you can't just pop in and watch somebody else's game.
Yes.
So that's why we're trying. That's part of what we're trying to stress by having matches that are live, and I think part of the issue is you glean information from watching other people play, especially when they're trying to play. In my opinion, when they're playing in an event, they're taking it like by definition, probably taking it more seriously than when they're just playing casually.
Yeah.
So like if that's all happening only between you and I at our own computers where no one else can see it and it's not being recorded, like it's almost like that information is lost. Like we can't even glean
Absolutely
what really happened to make that result occur.
And it's even more, I think it goes even further than that. I was going to say more granular, but it's not quite. What I was going to bring up is you're at a tournament, you finish your round. You'll walk around and talk to people, it's the usual bad beat stories, but exactly what you were saying, Scott, and this kind of takes it back to testing, is that the whole purpose of testing is to generate data, and then you can extrapolate information from that data and then build new decks, make changes on existing ones, etc. One of the advantages of being physically there is you can just watch the other events. It's like, oh, well, that guy was running an idea that I thought of. How did that turn out? As opposed to the existing events where if they're not being streamed, they're not being recorded, you're just looking at the final deck list, but you have way less information of how they got there. If you're sitting in your local store, you can just go watch the games and be like, oh, well, that guy played this board card and it worked out in this scenario. I'll make a mental note of that to try and apply it later. As opposed to you see the final deck list and like, well, why the hell was that there? You have no idea what they played leading up to it. So there definitely is a more challenging set due to the lack of information compared to what you would have otherwise. Because everything is effectively trying to interpret, hey, there was this event on the other side of the country. Okay, well, I can make some assumptions about what was there.
Yeah, and I think in this situation, we're constrained by like desire to play in the event, by sometimes there's funky rules of the events. Sometimes like there's, again, because of the nature of these only happening like let's just be generous and say once a month. Like if I want to play this character or this set of characters, like I'm playing them for a month.
Yeah,
and so like
you better like them.
Yeah. So like a lot of people will be playing new cards because this is the first time they've had the opportunity to do that in a competitive setting, and so you'll notice like a lot of the deck lists that are out there publicly, like the characters from older waves are hardly represented at all.
Right.
And that I refuse to believe that's the truth. And so back to testing, where this originally was.
I know, well, I mean, it relates. It's tangentially related.
So, but I don't think that means that you can't glean any information.
Correct.
I mean, I think the deck lists that are out there, most of them on Fortress Maximus from the events that have occurred, are the only test decks that you're going to be able to deal with. And I think
trying to build the gauntlet is complicated.
Yeah, I think you need to understand that you should be testing all your first iteration decks against known quantities. That's the first point. So we've had this set long enough now where, like, again, this all depends on how seriously you want to take it. But, like, we're obviously going to be coming at this from a serious point of view.
Right.
Like, to me, there's a few different, like, there's a few different deck archetypes that are out there that you like, that you can play against. But I think smashing two of your own creations against one another without one player being the control, not control deck, like the control experiment in this, like
the scientific method control.
Without one person being the control is casual at this point. It is not getting you any information at all.
Right.
If anything, all it's basically doing is telling you this is how these cards operate. So like if you've literally never played with the cards before and you're testing with someone, they're like, I don't want to play that known thing. It's kind of like, well, I mean, a bunch of people are going to be playing that known thing in all likelihood. So like,
you need to be prepared. Yeah.
Yeah. One of you should be the one to play that and understand why it's good and what its weaknesses are and what its strengths are, and because that's what you're going to have to build against.
Mm-hmm.
And likely be playing against. And I think that there's room for improvement in a lot of the decks that are out there, even as the control deck, control experiment deck in the situation. So I think there's room for innovation there. But for example, if you sit down with someone and I don't know how long this is going to take, but like you're going to play 10 games against somebody. So for 5 games, you play one of the control decks, and your opponent plays whatever they're trying to figure out. It might not even take this many games to do it. Right. And then you switch roles after 5 games. The one thing I will say is you're not there's going to be we all have more time to grind games, but I think the games might take a little bit longer and require a little bit more setup.
Right.
And I think if you watch some of the matches that I've had with Dan or you on webcam, I know right away what the problems with the deck are, and but I might not have the ability to and this is always an issue with testing in general. I might not have an issue. I might not have the ability to make a 10-card swap on the fly, and then come right back 5 minutes, 10 minutes later, and say let's keep going. Just because we are usually playing in a live stream or something like that, so it's not we could put up a I'll be right back thing, I guess.
Yeah.
And fix it, but we know right away what the issue is.
Exactly, and that does influence things to exactly your point. Yeah. Whereas if we were testing face to face, it's not uncommon. I usually show up with one of those 5,000 card boxes that has decks for days proxied up, and then we'll just swap things as we go. One thing I wanted to call out that you mentioned there, because you had said it spread across in what you were saying
tangentially.
Well, no, it was just it was said in parts. So, but I wanted to make sure that people understood. So one of the things that came up was you were talking about having the control deck, testing new things against known quantities. And I wanted to emphasize why, another reason, not just the reasons you have, but another one as to why that's important. Because, so say you have a new deck. I don't know. What if it was a Sky Shadow deck? I mean, that sounds kind of wild, but let's just say you wanted to try that out and you were going to just hammer that against one of the previous walls that we had, from Wave 4, one of the big fixtures, one of the decks of old. It's not just, I know how Galaxy operates, or I know how Airstrike operates, or I know how whatever the other thing operates, and then you're gauging power level against that. But it's also, if you're bashing it against Galaxy and you know how Airstrike does against Galaxy, and you are confident in your knowledge of the old meta, then you can gauge where on the power spectrum this new build lies compared to the old stuff, not just does it work at all. And I think that I have had conversations with people where I get the impression that it's just, test against old stuff because then you know whether this thing works. It's also test against old stuff so that you can appropriately gauge the power level or the consistency, the coherency, whatever metric you're looking for against other known quantities, which, again, I know you said that throughout what you were explaining, but I want to call attention to it again because I think that gets lost as people try and test of why am I wasting my time? Why can't I just play against an arbitrary control deck instead of the one I know? Well, you play against the one you know so that all the other variables are controlled for. This is the only actual variable is the new deck. Whereas if you're slamming, brand new blue deck, it's this has to be as good as the old control decks, and brand new aggro deck. You have two variables that you're trying to solve for simultaneously, and it's possible, but look, if you think you can do it, great, but take a step back and think about how much extra effort you're having to put in instead of being methodical about it and appropriately lining things up for your gauntlet.
Yeah, and I do think we've passed the point where you should be testing against any old decks at all.
Right. I was just elaborating on the
and I actually think one of the weaknesses of what I've seen going on is that there are no results that bear out that updates to old decks are still viable. I think people have discounted that, where I think that's a mistake.
Can you explain that further? I think there were too many negatives in there, and I got confused.
I don't think people are taking the time to update old decks with new cards and try new things with them.
Okay. It sounded like you were disagreeing with yourself earlier. So you're saying that there's still the potential that an old deck is fine now.
Yes, but I think we have enough results, which are mostly dominated by new cards, that's what you should be testing against. Even if what you're testing is an updated version of the old deck, which I think I would treat the updated version of the old deck as a new deck at this point, and then the Wave 5 current meta decks that you've seen out there posting results are the ones that you would treat as the control deck in this situation,
right? To
test against. Yeah, but the thing is, no matter what you feel about the events or what you feel about like how the decks were built or like the data that's available, these are still decks that went through a process and went through competition and emerged victorious.
Right.
And so that's like we're trying, like on shows like this, we tried it, like I know like during the set wrap ups and like where we thought old things were going to adjust, like all that whole series of podcasts you can go back and listen to again. Like we tried to give as much information up front as we possibly could, but even like I think like if you weren't coming at this whole situation even from starting at a point like that, you probably aren't listening to this podcast anyway. But like if you weren't listening to that, but like if you didn't do that, then you literally were just going in blind and just testing against old strategies. And like you said, it was pretty much already known that like with the cards that had come out, some of the old decks just absolutely had no place.
Right.
And like if you were over adjusting for something that you knew like the tools were out there to just completely shut those strategies down, like you were kind of wasting your time because it became very obvious that was already like not viable as it is.
Exactly.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, there were certainly decks that have run their course, we'll say. Even going back as far as Wave 1, if anybody can think of certain examples from back then. That at this point in time, so if we consider what you were describing earlier as point number 1, where you're testing, you need to have a regimented and defined testing regimen or schedule for how you want to do it. You know, make sure that you set up your gauntlet, hit the appropriate things in your gauntlet. Don't just mash random things. The second point is, I guess, informing the first, where when you're building out the gauntlet, you're never going to get it right 100% on the first try. Nobody does. That's the whole point of testing. But, you know, make those assumptions, make those decisions based on what you've seen, what you're seeing other people that you trust are talking about, how they're talking about it, so you don't, even if you have extra time now because of the circumstances, you still only have so much time. Don't waste a lot of time hammering out an idea that is just not going to work.
Yeah, and again, another suggestion I can make is watch our pre-sale championship videos, because again, those were high-level competition that was out there using new cards. Some of them, they were proxies at that point, but it was players who put the effort in before the set even came out and were playing at a high level. Because what I can say is, if you don't understand what makes a deck powerful, you probably need to see it.
Yes.
And that again is more difficult given these situations. But like, if there's a bunch of other videos out there of two random decks being matched against each other, you're not going to understand. Like when you sit down to play the control deck in this situation, you're not going to understand. You might not understand what makes them so powerful because you didn't see an interaction. It wasn't like you might have just been copying a deck list, but the interaction wasn't obvious to you.
Right.
And the thing I'll say about this format and this game has reached a point where certain games are very formulaic because of the green pip, or because of, you know, the amount of card draw that might be available to certain characters, or, you know, like certain attack orders will never change no matter what. Like there isn't so like if you're messing up those things compared to like somebody that did well with the deck, and you can see them doing that, like your testing may be invalidated by like not understanding how the control deck in the situation should be playing itself out.
I've definitely had this, and I think I've said this when I've streamed other games. I've probably said it on other shows, but I personally have that moment of I see someone else having success with a particular strategy, a deck, whether it's this game, it's another game, whatever. And I go, that looks cool. I'm going to try it. And then I try and test it, and I'm like, the thought literally goes through my head, I don't understand what I'm doing wrong. But I'm recognizing that I'm doing something wrong. It's not, to your point, these decks, we've been seeing patterns in certain deck lists, a variety of deck lists, and those patterns have continued since, well, the pre-release event that we ran. So obviously there's something there. You got to make sure that you're hammering it out both sides of the equation to understand what all of the various interactions are. There may be plays where it's, and I've had this definitely back when I played Magic back in the day, where it's, before I learned a lot of things, and I still have way more to learn, but there were definitely times that I watched people play where someone just explained to me how a deck functioned, and all I could think is, well, how would you ever, like, how does that ever work? It never works out that way for me, and it's because it isn't step 9, it was step 3 that set it up that many turns down the line, and that's where, through your testing, try different lines. And I did this, I think I called it out a lot when we did our various videos, whether I was playing you or Dan or Stefan or whoever. I called out a lot of things where it's, I'm going to do this thing. It's probably going to lose me the game, but I want to see how this plays out as part of the testing. And that's one of the things I want to make sure that I brought up in this discussion, is just don't keep repeating the same broken steps if they're not working. Like, if you know the deck's good and you're losing with it, try a different line so you're not just muscle memorying, if that's a phrase, yourself into making the same incorrect play. Because I know I've done that where I've insisted, no, this deck plays this way and I'm playing it this way. And it's like, well, yeah, you just lost 15 games in a row. Maybe you should change it up. Like, that's one of the things, you get into a rut when you're testing sometimes.
Yeah, I also think it's important to play against unknown commodities, because even if you play an event and every deck is not 100% mirrored to that, first of all, some decks will be.
Of course. Because
net decking is a thing. It's a shortcut that people use, and depending on the situation here, like, I mean, again, like we've talked numerous times, it's not, you're not just wasting one day, you're wasting a long time. So people want to like make sure their time isn't being, quote, wasted. They want to use a known commodity. That might actually happen more often now than it has in the past. I'm not sure.
That could be true.
Because to be honest with you, I feel like the players you're going to be playing against in any of these situations are going to be more educated. Because it takes more effort than just showing up to your local game store. But this can apply, to if you're in an area that is allowing that. I just feel like anybody, unfortunately, I feel like the player base that's you're going to play in any way, shape, or form going on right now is going to be a more educated, more elevated desire to do well, because there's other options right now for them just to stay home, and it's very easy for them to do so.
Right.
It takes more effort to go out or to go to online to play somebody multiple times a week and things like that. So I feel like the people you're playing are just elevated from a desire standpoint, which means they're probably looking at results and using them effectively. If you're not testing against those known quantities, like what does the result even mean? Like if you can't beat the basic deck that's out there, and I don't mean that from like there's no connotation to that word that there is in the world right now. that has to be the baseline. Like if it's okay to walk in there with scissors getting smashed by the rocks that are out there, but like who knows what the paper is? So like, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm.
Like if you keep getting smashed by the rock deck, but you're like, I'm convinced this works against decks that are better against that, but we don't even know what those are yet. Like I don't see the point of that. And we've talked about this in the past. But I think we're at a point where we have to say things. I think just in life, you say things multiple times for it to sink in. But like,
right.
Testing against these new strategies, and I'm glad to see now that there are variations in what they are. So keep that in mind. It's important to understand why the decks that are working, not just that they are working. Like it's why. So like if you're trying, like we'll just take the Sky Shadow decks for example, because they're easy to talk about because they're out there. Is you don't like a character like Horrible shines in that deck for many different reasons. It's because flip density is a big one.
Yep.
Multiple turns is a big one. So like you don't just the decks that have emerged are decks, and I think this is and that's an important distinction. Like, and I think a lot of this I've learned through playing in the sealed event is you see certain powerful strategies that there are in constructed that are not powerful and limited. One of them being Horrible, for example, not as powerful because your deck quantity of the cards that you need to work in that situation just aren't there.
Yeah.
And if they are there, they're not as powerful as the ones that you would have access to full playsets to in constructed. So like if you're like, yep, I'm gonna play, I don't know, decoy flares instead of fusion borer, like obviously there's a lot
doesn't feel as good, let me tell you.
If you're like, oh, I'm gonna play, I don't know, some other random upgrade instead of enhanced power cell, or instead of like increased durability that isn't even in the format or something like that, or like I'm gonna play laser scalpel instead of insert any other double black card here.
Yeah.
Like it's gonna be a different situation. Like if you're like, I'm gonna play Crystal of Power as essentially like a grenade launcher that goes away, or a sort of an emergency barricade that eventually goes away. That's a hell of a lot different than getting it back from the scrap pile for free with a sound blaster and having it not go away.
Exactly.
So I just think that there's what I've noticed is the constructed is a lot more synergistic than limited is, and I think if you are coming into testing not understanding the inborn synergies of the deck that has performed well, then you're basically playing the constructed deck as a limited deck. That's where I'm going with all this. That's like this big aside. Like you're not understanding like their plays in the right order to take advantage of them. You're not getting a Horrible turn where like over a series of 2 turns where you're basically like 5 damage to you and I only take 2 because of flipping and etc. Like things like that. Like if you're not saving up for these turns, or you're not like doing things optimally and things like that, like it's just this because you don't see the synergies that are there. It's like you're just not taking advantage of what the deck has to offer.
I think one of the advantages for this particular format, though, speaking specifically of Horrible, is a lot of those plays with Horrible are quite simply more obvious than they would be in other formats or even with other decks. It's to your point, like I'm doing 5 to 7 damage over the course of 2 turns. Well, it's like, yeah, play these cards and flip them. So people recognize that, and it makes it easier to spot when you're watching someone play that deck and go, okay, I can reverse engineer that scenario of, well, either play a lot of Black Pip cards in my deck or save them up for when I can do it with Horrible. But the same theory applies of, as you're observing other decks being played, whether it's in your testing and you have multiple testing partners and you're watching other people play, or you're watching games online, or you're reading about an article that's talking about a different deck. Okay, well, every deck has the turns where it's, if I can get to this state, whether it's through a series of plays or grinding them down or drawing a bunch of, whatever it is, this is the victory state. And how do I work backwards from victory formation to turn 1 kind of thing, and trying to get these things aligned. It sounds pretty simple, but for some of these decks, like I said, Horrible versions especially in Sky Shadow, it kind of slaps you in the face, maybe more than metaphorically, because the deck can be mean. Other ones may not be so obvious, but hitting those, the equivalent of the PTT turn in the aggressive deck where you KO 2 of their guys due to the PTT. Can you ID that in other decks so that your testing is more appropriate, more refined, and more meaningful? As Scott was saying, a lot of the games are formulaic. I guess you could say some of them are somewhat deterministic depending on the different things involved. Assuming that yes, Sky Shadow beats this if it does this, or X beats Y if it accomplishes this goal. Otherwise, it goes the other way. So you need to find all those things throughout, both through your testing and leading into the testing. So you can, to my earlier point, I'm going to try this thing and see if it changes the way something works out. Or you need to continue going the path you've been on.
I just think you need to understand that there is something to be gained by being the player that plays the set controlled deck in this situation, because especially in the situation we're in now, I think one of the good things about playing the way we are now is that you could play with people that are not in your geographic area.
Yep.
So if there isn't as much inbred testing, I guess we could say, because if I play somebody that I'm not used to playing with and they make a different play and I notice something about it, I feel like that's just as valuable as them playing a deck completely out of nowhere that they wouldn't have played otherwise.
Right.
But the big, like I said, the big thing for me is just that there's a greater than 0% chance that like you're going to run into somebody playing a deck that's within 5 to 10 cards than decks that are known quantities that are out there. And then if you don't understand how to even beat those, I mean, yes, they could tech themselves up by a few cards here and there, but like if you can't understand the basics of how to play with or against those, I feel like you're just at a huge disadvantage.
I mean, that feels axiomatic. I don't know if it necessarily is, but it is definitely worth repeating because, well, I mean, it's one of the cornerstones of trying to make sure that your testing plan is appropriate.
I just know Dan and I, the last time we played on stream any constructed events before Summit events started, like we both said, we're going to run one deck and you're going to run the Sky Shadow Horrible deck against it, like continuously. And that way I know I'm not going to play. I either am or I am not going to pursue changing things in the other version. Again, we can't. Our situation again is different because like we're live streaming and things like that. But like, the time is still a factor, and so if I'm going to walking away from a testing session now is probably and continuing to have delusions that I can make this work is going to be more detrimental to you now than it was in the old world, because again, like you might have an event that starts and you're locked into that decision for a lot of weeks.
Right.
So I mean, yes, you might not be able to just wholesale change everything you're doing, but I mean, you need to at least contemplate it and understand what the situation is going into it.
Yeah.
If you want to play, with that, and I guess the other thing is like information and discussion is just more important now than it was in the past, because I don't even think, because honestly, like a lot of the results are, like we said, offline. They're not really offline, but they're just not being shown. Like the whys are not there.
Right.
You have to determine a lot of the whys on your own.
Yeah.
And I will say in this game, I'm not positive that that's never different than anything has ever been, but I think it's just more exasperated now.
Yeah, certainly now. I mean, you can go over to Fort Max and look up the recent tournament results, but to exactly your point, it's, okay, these top 8, well,
why?
There are a lot of other questions that could be asked as to, I mean, even aside from why, like, okay, what were the exact numbers for the event? Why did the pairings shape out that way? Did everybody come in gunning for this particular build? You know, like there's a lot of things that could go into exactly why some of the results shaped out the way they did.
Yeah, and again, it's not to discount any results whatsoever. It's just,
of course, yeah.
You have to understand there has to be context, and if there is no context, then like, you know, I again, like, I only know our own events. They're the only events I participate in, so I don't even know like what are the prize structures, what are like, why do people even care? Like, you know, like I those kind of, like, I don't even know the answers to those questions. Like, you know, if every event is your weekly casual level of desire by a large majority of the player base, that's different than you're playing for $100 worth.
That actually does kind of go to your point about being locked in, and that a round in, because you play your first round, it takes a week in one of these events, let's say, just to make it up.
Right.
On day 5 of that week, you realize, wow, this deck sucks.
Right.
It's not just it sucks and you're stuck with it, but it's also, as silly as it's going to sound, it's a psychological thing of like, if you're there for a day, it's a Saturday, I go to the store, I'm going to hang out, it's going to be fun to hang out. Obviously, you're playing to win, but like, you know, you get to see everybody, you hang out with some friends, you have a good time. You're playing online, it's a struggle to coordinate with people. Maybe you have some internet problems or whatever. You realize your deck is doing terrible. It can be demoralizing, and then that also plays into the why of maybe, and again, this is not to discount results, but like, are people just phoning it in at any point in the event? Because all of these, intangibles change just by virtue of what we're all stuck with.
I think you can even, I don't even think it has to be as sky is falling as what you just said.
Yeah.
I think you could even be like, this card I played sucks in this deck.
Yeah.
And I played it as like a 3 of, let's just say. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
And like for me, it's Precision Fire, for example. Like, I think that card is not very good. Throwing that out there. Tip. It's a zap.
Yeah.
So now just play Rock Toss. So now every time that you draw that card in your hypothetical situation, day 5 of the week, you're like, God, this card sucks. I can't believe I played it. And it's like,
yes,
it's not even like the whole deck sucks. It's like just this one card I played sucked, and now I'm on tilt because I drew it. I do
that all the time. It tilts me to no end. I'm like, man, what was I thinking? But you're locked in and you're stuck with it. I could see that playing in to, depending on people's, to your point, the investment level in this. Now, to circle it back to testing, because I know it probably sounds like everybody that went on a tangent.
I don't think so, but yeah.
Well, it might, just because we were talking about a very specific thing. This was something I think one of my football coaches had said, or maybe it was one of my lacrosse coaches, whatever. But games are also practice. Like, you're still doing the things, and you should, coming in, practice way more so that the game is easy. Like, all the old adages about winning stuff in practice. But when you go to an event, and especially now, like we're talking about, where these drag on forever. Okay, let's say you do poorly, or you realize, man, I included all these 3-ofs and these cards are terrible. They should be 1-ofs or out of the deck entirely. You should also be trying to learn from those scenarios as well. Losing is a pretty good teacher.
Yeah, and again, I will say that I believe that with the advent of this wave and then the changes in the way the game plays out, especially from a Tight Master perspective, which we talked about ad nauseum and things like that. Like, you have to get used to that play pattern. I know for me personally, I've made decks literally with like 26 1-ofs in them. So if I was to send you a deck list, hey, Vince, person I play with all the time, here's my deck with 26 1-ofs. Go to town and let me know how to play it. Do you think you would know in my head why exactly I played 1-of every single card? Like,
well, it depends on the characters, but yes, there's one character I can think of why. But yeah, trying to identify why the hell is there a 1 of this and a 3 of that and a 2 of that? Like, it would take me a ton of games.
Right. And I think that, like, I think without even trying to play the decks that have results, I think you wouldn't even understand a lot of those intricacies, and maybe you can make an improvement over them. Like remember, I don't think any of these decks are finished products because again, these people were locked in. So unless you, and unfortunately, some of the players that have done well have written tournament reports,
yes,
about how they've done well in certain events, and said I would do this differently. But even that, we're now at beta. If the event itself was the alpha, now we're at beta, and that's untested. And because again, we're 5 sets into the game, the power level of the cards is very high.
Yes,
because you could be like, you can now play Fusion Board instead of Crowbar. There's
a slight difference in those cards.
Right, so
a little bit.
So going on to the beta version, changes I would have made, I know these cards sucked, so I know I wouldn't play these again, and they give reasons why. That's valuable information to have, but ultimately the changes they would make, what I can respect about a lot of the things I've read is a lot of the changes that you can make are people saying this card was bad, I would do something differently. But they don't even know what that something is necessarily.
Yeah.
But they might have seen that somebody else did that, and so they would say I would have tried doing this. A lot of them, I don't think there's. I think anybody that definitively says I did this wrong and I should have done this, and is and I would have done better. That's probably a fair statement, but even there, the changes are still beta.
Absolutely.
Because until the event happens again. And a lot of times you don't want to run so similar of a deck again for the next 4 weeks again. It's just tough. So, like I said, I would take in as much of the information that's out there. If you don't want to do some of this testing yourself, where you are running the control deck, I guess it hasn't happened for us all that often. But we have a bunch of videos out there where that is happening. We have a bunch of videos out there for the events, so you can treat them like what you would do differently. But I know for example, Dan and I did one session. I know Stefan on his channel did I think 2 or 3 hour sessions on the last 2 Sundays. So there's a lot of data out there that a lot of them were running. A lot of times I would tune in and they were running the stock deck and things like that. And we promised going forward, as we live stream and things like that, we will strive to do this as well.
Right. There was definitely a period in the beginning, just to call this out.
Yeah,
I think in the beginning, we definitely tried a bunch of wacky stuff, especially me, like Cosmos builds and other nonsense, because it's new cards. Part of it is, does this deck literally trip over its own feet? And I think this is an important thing for testing. While we were harping on having that control deck, sometimes even if you mash random things, you can tell, okay, this is just straight up not going to work because it trips over its own feet and you can throw things out of the window. It's just not as efficient or an appropriate a process. But for me, when I'm building things, it's often a very iterative process where it's, okay, I got to see if this deck even works, but it is definitely not up to snuff to go get punched in the neck by Sky Shadow. It's just, I know it's not ready. So go through a couple iterations. All right, now I think this one's viable. Let it go out there, kind of thing. Point being is that, well, what you were saying, Scott, we're going to try and go more towards the normalized testing as opposed to what we were doing before, where it was very much just showcasing random things for funsies.
Well, no, it's also establishing what was there because there was no other way to do it. And
well, yeah.
I mean, we would normally do that behind closed doors.
Mm.
So, we weren't, because there's usually an event that you'd be leading up to. The fact that that's even out there publicly, which I hope gave some people information leading up to some of these results. I would venture to guess that. I guess what I can say is, in my opinion, you should be doing this because I feel like the community has reached this point. I understand that we haven't physically had the cards for what is it, a month now? Is it not even a month now?
I've lost track, but I think it's a month.
When this goes live, it'll be a month, literally a month. So when it goes live, so it hasn't been that long. But again,
but has it?
I mean, how long we've been playing with proxy for
yeah, exactly. That's the thing.
Yeah.
It gets weird because the timing and everything.
Right. So like I feel like doing without testing in this manner, you're well behind. The clock has passed you by. So
and it's to harp on a point there, because I can hear people that I've talked to in the past about this exact subject, not in this game, but in other games and other topics as well, where it's just the brute force and ignorance path, as my wife would classify it, where it's just, no, come hell or high water, I'm doing it this way. And yes, I guess if you throw enough marshmallows at a brick wall, or, pick your cliche of choice about just doing it enough, you'll get there. Yes, hypothetically, you could do it, but we're talking real world scenarios, and again, within the context of trying to prepare for what we assume is going to be a high level competitive event. If that is the case, you can't afford to fall behind. You have to keep up with the Joneses on an information level, and in order to do that, you need to make sure that every time that you're going to data gather, it's as efficient as possible. Hence, the regimented and controlled structure, scientific method of trying to identify which decks and which strategies work. You could just flip coins all day and maybe hit the lottery, but like, what are the odds of that happening? Scott, all the numbers. Tell me all the numbers.
not good, I can say that one. If you don't want to do this, then just don't be surprised when you lose to those known quantities. That's the other thing.
Exactly.
Like, don't complain about it. Like, again, like, nothing is set in stone. As I've said numerous times, we are still in the establishing the rock phase of this metagame, and we likely will be for a long time, because, like we said, the results are only going to come once a month or once every 2 months. Not that that's that much different than they were in the past, but it just feels different, I guess you could say. I don't know why. It's just the local results would come maybe once a month, but like you might be able to match that with 3 other local results and kind of try to form some opinion about what's going on there.
And it's also I don't know how many events are out there aside from ours. I mean, I'm aware of some of them. Like I mentioned earlier, I can go look at Fort Max and see what ones are there.
Yeah.
Even if it's the locals from way back in the day, or it's, it was EI, it was the PPG events, it was whatever. But there were lots of people playing games and talking about them, even if it wasn't necessarily a major event. So there was stuff to read, stuff to watch, stuff to talk about. Now it's the quantity of events have just shrunk to the level, and instead of having across the US, however many stores running even 10-person events, it's now the Vectorsigma and other online ones, maybe 2 of them combined for how many people? Just sheer weight of numbers. You can't get what I was calling earlier, the evolution cycle for this, the turnover, quickly enough as you did before.
Yeah, but there are enough results out there to at least, again, play against what's new.
You can still do something.
I just think you sleeving up your idea of what you want to run as a 40-card deck and my idea as a 40-card deck, both of us being original ideas, I just think at this point, if you want to be taking it seriously, and the person that asked us to cover this topic, I assume, wants to be taking it seriously, you need to always be, your deck will play against the known quantity and my deck will play against the known quantity, and we will switch as to who's playing what. But like us matching our 2 unknown quantities against each other, to me, just isn't doing anything.
Absolutely. Yeah, we've definitely hit that point despite the change in tournament schedule and structure, that there's no real excuse to not be aware of the major players at this point.
Yeah, and if you want, and just as an aside, like, the way that I would do this outside of a COVID world, like in the old world, would be I would be testing against updated versions of known quantities first.
Of course.
So they would act as the controller.
Uh-oh.
Somebody's walking by.
Right on cue. Yeah. So, okay, I think we're safe.
No, they're still here, but
well, yeah, but they're not as agitated. I was going to ask you something. This is just a minor thing, and it's kind of going off topic. But for our sealed event, for example, the deck lists were open.
Mm-hmm.
I know
they will be for constructed events too.
That was one of the questions I was going to ask. So going forward, do you feel that this influences much of anything? Does this change anything for you as a player?
No, I don't care. Like there's a. All right, I'm gonna date myself here, but there was a news group question one time in Rec Arts Magic the Gathering.
Oh boy! For those of you out there who don't know what that is, just you have Google, you have the entirety of human knowledge and history at your fingertips. Go check it out.
That's where I found it, but it was a question about poker, and it said, "Would you rather?" This is Texas Hold'em. Would you rather know what's in your opponent's hand? Like, if you had perfect information about either what's in your opponent's hand or what card is going to be coming on every river, which one would you choose? And all the gamers said, I'd obviously like to know the river card because I know what's in my opponent's hand 9 times out of 10 already. So it's the same type of situation here. I know what's in my opponent's decks most of the time anyway.
Yeah, within probably 35 cards.
Yeah, so I'd rather. So it's not a huge factor. It's how you play the game, not knowing what's in your opponent's deck in this situation. That's even a step away from knowing what's in your opponent's hand.
Right.
So I hope that story made sense. But I don't care about those kind of things because, especially in this game, I still believe play skill is the major factor, and I can prove that already by the results of this event.
Gotcha. One other question for you. This is the last one on the docket. So we talked a lot about the very, well, maybe not very, but I feel more abstract parts of testing. Do you feel that anything changes or any recommendations for dear questioner who sent this in when it comes to sideboarding? How would you, any tips on that end or do you just do the same thing?
Say it again, I'm sorry.
So sideboarding, how do you feel your testing differs when trying to crank out an appropriate sideboard for the next upcoming event? Or any recommendations that you would make for the person who sent in this question initially?
As usual, play more sideboarded games than unsideboarded games. Because, again, you're going to...
at least 50% are sideboarded.
More than that are going to be sideboarded.
Right. Of course.
So I would always go from that side of things.
Mm-hmm.
And test out what those strategies are as well.
Makes sense to me.
Yep.
Well, we've been going for a while, Scott. Anything else you want to throw in, either specifically about testing or any of the content updates, things that are coming in the future, or any last minute stuff?
No, I mean the big thing is again, we've been talking about the set and this meta and what we perceive this meta to be, which we still can't define. But I think a lot of the things that we've said over time are starting to bear each other out, are starting to bear fruit. So for us, it's beating a dead horse. But I was just going back to listening to old podcasts, especially the ones that happened right around the time of the set reviews and things like that. I think you'll see that a lot of that has borne out, and that so we're always looking. We're currently asking if there's certain aspects of this that you want us to talk about. Just please let us know, because for us, a lot of this is rehashing what's already out there. And for example, we won't be playing Constructed until next month. Personally, on a tournament level, maybe on a testing level, we will be. So we won't have any of our own personal results to talk about for a bit. So if you have questions, just feel free to ask them.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's cool to hear what from everybody out there. We'll see the likes or thumbs up or whatever across whatever social platform. But it's cool to hear back from people as to, well, I want to hear more about this, or that sounded like a cool idea, or, what are your thoughts on this general other thing? Which is kind of what the genesis of this was, is that, one of our listeners said, hey, well, what about the testing? So that's what spawned the whole discussion. So hit us up, let us know. And we'll go from there. But definitely stay tuned for the other new content as well. We're going to be adding on to our repertoire and see what else we can produce for everybody that's both entertaining and informative. So,
Yep.
I think that'll do it for this show, Scott. So, as always, everybody, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And Black Lives Matter.